What is up, everybody, and welcome to FLW Videos. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about how good the Generation 4 starters are in Pokemon Go. The reason why we're talking about this is because Pokemon Go sent out a artwork related to the 2nd anniversary for Pokemon Go. And as you can see, the Generation 4 starters were seen in the photo. So I thought it would be a really good idea to talk about how good these Pokemon are by comparing them to the Generation 1 through Generation 3 Pokemon. If you do enjoy this type of video, be sure to like and subscribe, but without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the video. The first Pokemon that I want to talk about is Torterra, max AP of 2,825. Torterra is a dual-type Pokemon of grass and ground. When we take a look at the comparison, we're going to be going up against Venusaur first. So let's go ahead and take a look at the stats. By the way, I cleared out the ranking. I don't want to skew it by any means, but I want to specifically focus on the stats. When we take a look at the stamina, we've got 190 for Torterra, where Venusaur is a 160. Then when we look at the attack, 202 for Torterra and then 198 for Venusaur. So far, Torterra is leading in the first two topics. The third one is defense. This is the only one that Venusaur has an advantage on. But as many of you know, defense just doesn't matter as much in Pokemon Go. So let's go ahead and pull up the Generation 2 starter. And that is Meganium. Unfortunately for Meganium, it is worse off in most cases. Once again, the only thing kind of giving it a saving grace is going to be the defense stat, but it's really not that much off from Torterra's. Let's go ahead and move on to the Generation 3 Pokemon, and that's going to be Sceptile. So this is going to be a clearly different type of Pokemon that you would use. Torterra is going to be a little bit more tanky with a stamina stat that's going to be 50 higher than Sceptile. And then when you look at Sceptile on the attack, it has 21 higher than Torterra. And then on the defense, Torterra clearly has the advantage. So in most ways, Torterra has the advantage besides attack, but the attack stat is extremely important in Pokemon Go as it currently stands. So what I want to do now is talk about the future value of these Pokemon. For instance, you might think that Venusaur is the #1 grass-type attacker. And yes, for now that is true. But what are you going to say when the rest of the starters end up with a Community Day moveset that is equivalent to Frenzy Plant? That would mean that there could be some new options. So I want to go ahead and put them in the order that I believe is going to be in Pokemon Go. From left to right, we have Meganium, then Venusaur, then Torterra, then Sceptile. The reason why I put Sceptile in first is simply because of its attack stat. As you will imagine, with Venusaur moving up to the #1 spot with an attack stat that's only 190 something, it's able to overcome other Pokemon simply because of the move that it has. So just imagine what's going to happen when Sceptile gets it. And then Torterra isn't going to be too far behind, but it's definitely going to have a fairly good impact from a grass typing. Let's go ahead and move into the 2nd Generation 4 starter, and that is Empoleon, max AP of 2,741. Empoleon is a dual-type Pokemon of water and steel. Of course, comparing these Pokemon across the different starters wouldn't be fair if we were to consider the steel type, so I think the best neutral way to do this is going to be focusing on water. But the first Pokemon that we're going to be comparing to is going to be Blastoise. So let's go ahead and pull up the stats. When we take a look at the stats, let's go ahead and start out with stamina. Empoleon has a stamina stat that is 10 higher than Blastoise. Then when we take a look at the attack, it's actually going to be beating it by 39, so Empoleon is clearly a better attacker. Then thirdly, the only thing that Empoleon falls to on Blastoise is going to be defense. With Blastoise's defense stat at 210, it's going to be kind of hard to rival from a starter perspective anyways. But Empoleon, I think, clearly gets the advantage. Let's go ahead and move on to the Generation 2 starter, and that is Feraligatr. So when we take a look at Feraligatr, Feraligatr actually wins in stamina. It's not that far behind in attack, only by 5, and then in the defense, Feraligatr has a higher defense as well. So in this case, it seems like Feraligatr could either slightly have the edge or could be a little bit behind Empoleon. It just depends on what you think is important. And then finally, the Generation 3 starter. and that is Swampert. When we take a look at the stats, so it clearly wins with the stamina stat of 200. Then when you take a look at the attack at 208, that's only 2 behind Empoleon. Then with the defense, it is clearly lower than Empoleon, but like I said, most people tend to focus on the attack. So let's go ahead and talk about how I think these Pokemon are going to rank out from a starter standpoint. If we were to focus on the water typing, this is the order that I think it is going to work. So Empoleon is going to be the most impressive Generation 4 starter that we have seen so far, because it clearly could outdo its counterparts. But just know, just because Feraligatr is in at 3rd and Swampert is in at 2nd and then Empoleon at 1st, doesn't mean that the spread is very far. I think that they are closer than what you would expect, and once they can get a Community Day move, they could compete against other water-type Pokemon, especially something like Vaporeon, maybe for that 3rd or 4th spot in water typing. Let's go ahead and move on to the 3rd and final Gen 4 starter, and that is Infernape. Max EP of 2,464. Infernape is a dual-type Pokemon of Fire and Fighting. The first Pokemon that we are going to compare against is going to be Charizard. So let's go ahead and take a look at the stats. Keep in mind, in this standpoint, we are going to be focusing on Infernape from a fire typing. It is very possible that Infernape could dominate from a fighting type versus the other starters if it simply gets a really good moveset. As always, it does depend on the moveset, but let's just compare the stats. When we take a look at the stats, its stamina stat is actually lower than Charizard, 152 versus 156. Then the attack is roughly the same at 222 and then 223. Then with the defense, Infernape actually has a lower defense significantly than Charizard. When we pull up the Generation 2 starter, that's going to be Typhlosion. Well, guess what? Typhlosion actually has the exact same stats as Charizard, so it's going to be a similar case as well. Then when we look at the Generation 3 starter, I think this is going to be the most like-for-like comparison just because of the typing. We have Blaziken, that is also a fire and fighting type. But when you compare the stats, you've got Blaziken winning in the stamina at 160 versus the 152. Then in the attack stat, Blaziken clearly once again has the advantage. With an attack stat of 240, that is nothing to laugh at. And then finally, the defense. Infernape finally gets a win on the defensive side with a 151 versus a 141. But as always, the attack stat tends to be king. This is definitely going to be more of the closer spread that we've seen among all 4 of the Pokemon. But this is the impact that I think Infernape is going to have. I do think that Typhlosion and Charizard are going to be better than Infernape, at least from a fire typing. Once Typhlosion gets its Community Day move, it could easily do just as well as Charizard. Although the moves on the front move are a little bit different and then the typing is a little bit different as well, there are going to be certain cases where Typhlosion could do just as well as Charizard, if not better. And then finally, Blaziken is going to be a Pokemon that's going to be difficult to beat with such a high attack stat. I just don't think Infernape can compete. The only way that it could compete, I think, is going to be from the fighting type, and it has to get a really good moveset. Because a 220 plus on the attack stat from a fighting type is actually fairly good and could put it within the top 5 or top 6 Pokemon. So I want to go ahead and rank all of the Generation 4 starters among themselves. And this is how I decided to rank it. I put Infernape in 3rd. I know Infernape is a fantastic looking Pokemon. I really do enjoy the model, and to be honest, I think it's my favorite out of the 3. But as far as impact is concerned, it has a lot of competition from the fire typing and also a lot of competition from fighting. The best case scenario is that it ends up getting a special move that's going to be one of the better moves. I personally think it's going to stand a little bit better of a chance with the fighting, especially with an attack stat that's 220 plus. Fighting type don't tend to have a very high attack stat. Torterra is going to be interesting. I think for a while it's going to kind of be a sleeper Pokemon. It's going to be a Pokemon that a lot of people don't think about because of Venusaur getting Frenzy Plant, and then by that time Generation 2, Generation 3 could already have their Community Day. I think a lot of people are going to kind of overlook Torterra. But once it can get a special move that's going to be on par, I think it's going to completely dominate, except for maybe Sceptile. And then thirdly, we have Empoleon. Empoleon is going to be a very cool Pokemon to see in the game. I find it very interesting that it has Steel type as its second typing. I think it could open up the door. Hopefully with a community day, we may not see a Water typing and maybe see a Steel type, because Steel type desperately needs a better moveset, and who knows, maybe Empoleon could be the Pokemon that ends up getting it. But anyways, this is how I decided to rank all of the Generation 4 starters. I want to go ahead and hear what you have to say. Which Generation 4 starter are you most excited about? Be sure to put it in the comments section below, and I will see you next time.
Hit me like a tidal wave, triggered by the aftershock. Hit me like a